The chronicler kicked the curtain aside and found the scribal witness bound, a gag pressed between his teeth, and two acolytes forcing a torn scroll into his hands. Suspicion tightened the chronicler's jaw. He moved without ceremony and seized the scrap before the acolytes could complete their ritual. The cellar smell hit him, damp straw, spilled wine, and the sore iron of old blood. He counted the steps and the stacked crates as he pulled the witness free, counting because counting held panic steady. Suspicion pushed him forward. He could not leave a man carrying a stamped seal and a half, erased name, chronicler. The scribal witness breathed when the gag came away. They. Who are they? The chronicler's voice was low. He pressed his palm against the witness' shoulder to stop the tremor in his fingers. The first 5 sentences set the immediate problem. A ritual erasure interrupted, a witness endangered, fragments seized. The chronicler is a scholar by habit and a case maker by conviction. He had spent months tracing marginal marks in ruined codices. He knew the difference between a worn page and deliberate scraping. He knew how a doctrine could be weaponized. He had suspicion, and that suspicion had produced work. Catalogue entries, ink rubbings, and a chain of notes in his brass, latched notebook. He dragged a stool close and unfolded the scrap. The ink had been scrubbed. Where a name should have been, the page bore a polished pale circle and a tiny stamped lip sigil. The chronicler pressed a thumb to the margin and slowed his breath. "Show me where they did this," he said. The scribal fingers trembled. In the chapel under the cistern, the witness said, voice breaking, "They words weaken the soul. They make names vanish." He mimed, sealing his lips with 2 fingers. The gesture lodged in the chronicler's mind like a tool dropped on a workbench. It was a precise act with intent. They left the cellar in a rush. The tavern above closed its shutters as if nothing had happened. The chronicler carried the scrap wrapped in oilcloth under his coat. He had discovered signatures and scraped glosses before, but never this pattern. Repeated sealed mouth stamps across isolated fragments, always surrounding places and names. The pattern suggested organization, not piety. Suspicion shifted into alarm. At the safe house, a battered table waited. The chronicler spread the scraps under a lantern and laid out tools. A narrow reading monocle, a small bone stylus, a pair of metal tweezers. He worked while the scribal witness rubbed his temples and swallowed water. "Tell me precisely." The chronicler. "How do they take names?" The witness looked at the illuminated margin. "They pull the words line by line. They burn ink on new copies. They scrape old glosses and press wax over letters. Sometimes they wrap lips with cloth. Sometimes they cut small scars and press an amulet. The Hierophant points, and we stop speaking." He mouthed the word stop and clenched his jaw. The chronicler held up a scrap for the witness to confirm. "Is this your hand?" "Yes. I copied it for them. I copied, then they told me to remove the name. I tried to keep one letter." The witness' voice faltered. He lifted a finger and traced a pale groove along the parchment where ink had been scratched away. They examined the scratches under the monocle. The scraping had a rhythm. The chronicler tapped the margin. "Someone trained those hands," he said. "This is not random." The witness said a name so softly the chronicler almost missed it. "Marcellus." "Marcellus," the chronicler repeated. He did not leave the name suspended in air. He wrote it in the notebook and underlined it twice. Context followed quickly. A magistrate with distant ties to provincial order, a man who had the power to close investigations and to reassign records. The chronicler's pen hesitated, then moved again. Suspicion became strategy. Night deepened. The chronicler and the witness moved to the chapel beneath the cistern. They crouched in a shadowed arch and watched acolytes arrange a circle on a stone slab. The chronicler counted the acolytes, 6 in all, faces rapt, hands steady. One kneeling novice had a cloth gag fastened behind his head. A marble amulet rested in an acolyte's palm. It bore the same sealed, mouth icon as the scraps. Observation changed their fear into precise evidence. The chronicler fetched a small camera. His hands knew the exact quarter, inch to hold it steady, and took 2 blurred photographs through a crack. An acolyte turned. The chronicler froze. The witness mouthed a soft, upward warning. Acolyte eyes slid past them. The chronicler's heart beat, but he kept his hands still. They took one step back. The acolytes resumed their slow motions. The chronicle noted the ritual scars along the kneeling novice's jaw and a slow line of ash from incense on the slab. He learned the distance of the candlelight to the stone and the manner in which the acolytes folded their hands. Each detail promised utility in argument, later, when words would have to persuade others. Back at the safe house, the chronicler spread the scraps and found an irregular marginal note, half scraped but still legible. He leaned in. The note named a magistrate and a date. The chronicler felt his mouth dry. A new feeling threaded through him, the sense that his work could unmake reputations and expose patrons. His chest tightened. Alarm thickened into dread. He questioned the witness in a quick sequence, pressing for specifics: who sealed the mouth sigil. He asked the hierophant's hand. The witness said, not his face, his hand. He wears a flat signet. He never speaks in public. He signs with the closed lip mark. The witness mimed the stamp with a quick motion. He walks through the city and people lower their eyes. He chooses who must disappear. Why Marcellus, the chronicler? The witness hesitated. Marcellus spoke a name aloud before the crowd. He used a soldier's oath. The hierophant, the oath made the soul swollen. They called him loud and asked him not to speak. He laughed. They erased him. The witness twisted his ink-stained fingers together and looked away. The chronicler's notes multiplied. Each line of inquiry produced another question. He arranged a plan. Reconstruct the rubric of enforced silence, link the sealed mouth stamp to public incidents, and find who protected the cult in magistrate circles. The plan was a set of cold steps, but it carried moral weight. If the cult enjoyed protection, the chronicler would become dangerous in the eyes of those who profited. They moved next to interrogation about doctrine. The scribal witness sat with hands folded, and the chronicler questions in quick orders, the kind that leave no room for evasions. Show me how they punish speech. The chronicler. The witness lifted his left hand and mimed a small incision along his lower jaw, scars for disobedience. The first cut taught silence. The second erased my sister's name from a ledger. They held her ledger up. They scraped the page clean while she screamed. The hierophant pressed a stone amulet to her mouth and took the sound away. Tell me the words they spoke. The chronicler's probe was clinical. They did not speak the words. They signed. They circled the hands and the novices stilled. Then the hierophant made a motion like closing a lid. The novices made small, sharp gasps but did not speak. The witness swallowed and licked his lips. He refused to say the hierophant's name aloud now. They argued quietly about method, whether to fetch other witnesses, whether to publish what they had. The chronicler insisted on caution. We must confirm the magistrate's involvement before we accuse him, he said. If you wait, they deburn what remains. The witness replied. They will find me. The exchange tightened into 3 rapid back and forth lines when a knock rattled the safe house door. They both froze. The knock came again, harder. The chronicler moved to the peep slit and watched a hooded courier slip away into the night. The external event forced a decision. They could follow the courier or barricade. They followed. The courier led them to the Sistine Chapel, still warm with incense. From above, a narrow shaft of moonlight cut the darkness and revealed torn manuscript pages floating in dust motes. The chronicler reached for a page and found a small, partial rubric with inked glosses, a list of names with pale circles where letters had been removed. The chronicler's hands shook as he laid the paper on his lap. Then the silent hierophant appeared. He filled the doorway like a carved figure. He did not speak. The chronicler smelled frankincense and cold stone. The hierophant's mouth was wrapped in a ceremonial gag and his signet caught candlelight. He raised a slow hand and a hush fell so absolute that the chronicler felt his own breath loud. The hierophant's arrival was the chapter's pivot. Everything the chronicler had suspected now had a living center. The hierophant's presence converted theory into a person to be confronted. The chronicler stepped forward with a small camera for proof. The hierophant's hand moved. The scribal witness froze, body rigid. The hierophant pointed at the chronicler with his signet. He made a single, precise gesture. A slow crossing of the fingers against his palm, a ritual sign for sealing. The chronicler felt an impulse to speak and found his throat tight. He tugged a small photograph from his coat and held it out. "You must leave the Hierophant finally," his voice a dry rasp, spoken once. "You cannot make names disappear in the record and expect the city to forget." The chronicler answered, "Names leak like wounds." The Hierophant replied, "They set rot." "We cut it away." The Hierophant stepped forward and acolytes moved to seize the witness. The chronicler shoved the scraps and a small bundle of scrolls into his satchel and grabbed the witness's wrist. The witness tried to wrench free. Acolytes pulled. A short, violent scuffle followed in which the chronicler struck an acolyte's arm and broke a candle. The scuffle produced light, sound, and a bag of falling embers that scattered on the stone. Then the chronicler ran. He ran down a narrow stone stair with the satchel at his belt and the sound of feet behind him. He reached the tavern cellar and pushed through damp crates into daylight as dawn found its edges. He did not stop until the tavern's alley spit him out onto the road. The cost was immediate. He had left the scribal witness half, grasped by acolytes, and heard the witness's breath arrest into a small, ragged sound. The chronicler's hands trembled. He had partial proof and a witness in danger. At a cold archive, the chronicler spread the fragments on a brass, latched table and began reconstruction. He worked in quick, neat motions, matching threads in vellum, reading ink grain across margins, comparing stamped sigils. The manuscript bits formed a partial rubric. Instructions on sealing speech, lists of names, sanctions for those who spoke aloud. He wrote down each reconstructed clause with steady handwriting. His fingers smelled of ink and ash. A surprise surfaced among the marginalia. A thin notation in a different hand that named Marcellus and referenced an official decree. The chronicler frowned and then read the notation aloud. Marcellus carried a public oath. See Decree of March, protected by Prefect Lucius. That note changed the trail. It made a private cult into a network with patrons. The chronicler felt a new emotional shift, dread to determination. He began to assemble the argument. A timeline of public incidents where names had been erased, linked to funerary records and judicial transfers. Each connection was a new danger. Each connection required him to speak the names aloud in testimony. He placed a small bone stylus on the pile and considered the witness. He had to decide whether to go back for the scribal witness. He thought of the witness' ink, stained fingers and the burn mark on his hand. He imagined the Hierophant's signet pressing wax over a name. He heard the witness's last open breath in the stairwell. That concrete sound pushed him to act. A mid-chapter reveal arrived when he compared a civic ledger to one of the shrine scraps and found identical stamping in the margins. The sealed mouth sigil on an official ledger. The magistrate's hand had placed the stamp. The chronicler's pen paused over the ledger entry. The twist was specific. Institutional protection, not merely individual collusion. He pulled together a plan to secure witnesses and to publicize the rubric. He prepared two routes. One to retrieve the scribal witness by night, the other to place copies of the reconstructed rubric disguised among trade documents for safe distribution. He could not trust the magistrate not to purge records. He could not trust the city's guards either. That night he returned to the Sistine Chapel with a small group. A clerk he trusted and a rope of old contacts. He slid into the shadow and found the chapel quiet, but for a low hum from burning resins. He heard footsteps in the stair above and a hushed negotiation in the antechamber. He moved closer and overheard the name Lucius mentioned in a curt baritone. The chronicler pressed his ear to the stone and tasted the damp air. They were discovered. Acolytes moved like a trap. The chronicler's group was small, and they were forced into flight. He had planned to retrieve the witness, but the Hierophant's network had anticipated a raid and had tightened the circle. The chronicler managed to grab a single bundle of scrolls and fled. He heard the scrape of sandals and the muffled cry of the witness as he was dragged away. One of the acolytes called out, "Leave him, we seal him now." The chronicler did not answer. He ran until his lungs burned, until dawn stripped the alley of shadows. He had partial proof, but also a failure that cost the witness. The failure lodged in him as guilt woven to resolve. He could not undo what had happened, but he could change the next move. At dawn he returned to the archive and worked through the morning. He reconstructed rubrics and cross-referenced names. He set traps in his copies. Deliberate misdirections and decoy names placed in merchant rolls. He opened a page and pinned the recovered partial rubric to his brass, latched notebook. He wrote a line under it: protect witness, expose patron. 2 shifts had moved him. Suspicion to alarm, then alarm to resolve. Each emotional turn was shown in action. The seizure of the scrap, the rush into the chapel, the choice to flee with evidence, the plan to expose the magistrate. He felt the urgency in his fingers and the tremor in his breath, and he let those sensations direct him rather than abstract claims of courage. The chapter ends with him alone in the archive, arranging the paper and pressing the seal into a small wax packet. He looks up when the door creaks. Footsteps cross the corridor. He hears a hand rap the oak once, twice. The sound is ordinary and precise. The chronicler folds the final scrap into his notebook and answers the knock with a single line: steady and prepared, who comes? He calls to the door. The hand knocks again, lighter this time. The chapter closes on that concrete beat. A knock at the archive door, and the chronicler's fingers closing around his brass, latched notebook. He shoved the palimpsest toward the scribal witness and said, "Unroll it now. Show me the line they tried to erase." Suspicion drove his hands. Suspicion had been the engine of every step since he had first thrown back a curtain and found the witness gagged and bound. He wanted proof, not rumor, and he wanted it before whatever pressure the cult held could erase more. The scriptorium's candle threw hard edges across the table. The chronicler pushed a second candle nearer, then leaned forward until the witness blinked under the glare. The chronicler's suspicion was precise. He believed the sect's doctrine had a method, and that method worked on bodies and ink alike. He had read the earlier fragments, traced the looping marginalia, and catalogued contradictions, but those were pages and suppositions. Now he needed an audible line, a physical sign that speech could be punished and wiped. He had called himself a historian when he left his office. Here he acted like an examiner, hands moving over parchment, fingers looking for varnish and scrape marks. The scribal witness fingers trembled as he reached for the rolled sheet. He had been found gagged in the previous raid. The chronicler recalled the torn scroll pressed in the man's hands. "Show me." The chronicler. "Show me how they make silence obey." The witness hesitated, eyes lowering to the scraped face of the manuscript, then eased the roll open. They worked by lamplight. The glyphs at the top were palimpsest, scraped ink under later script, layers like thin skins of writing. The chronicler pulled the monocle down and scanned the margins until he found the paling stroke. A sentence scored almost to the fibers, letters that refused to hold ink. The witness coughed around the gag, a wet sound that made the chronicler set his jaw. "Read the damaged line," the chronicler ordered. He did not ask. He pressed the brass, latched notebook's edge against the table, a visible ledger of his intent. The chronicler's actions showed his determination. He would not let the witness fold back into silence. The scribal witness swallowed, fingers moving as if to trace the letters before he spoke. He had ink stains on his fingertips and a burn mark on the back of his left hand that flared when he flexed. He began, then stopped. Eyes fixed on a smudge where the ink had been scraped level with the parchment. "Name the word." The chronicler. "Say one syllable that survived the scraping." Suspicion narrowed into an order. The chronicler's tone held an edge now. The witness' hesitation widened the room. The candle flame trembled in draught from the shutter. The moment demanded a small, concrete answer. The witness pressed his palm to the table, then lifted it and mimed, sealing his mouth with 2 fingers. He mouthed the letters without sound. "Scribal witness." The chronicler aloud, testing. "Speak it." The witness' lips quivered. He forced a breath and let out a rasped consonant, a thin, reconstructed sound that sounded like a syllable half swallowed. When the syllable left the witness, the chronicler watched the acolyte in the doorway flinch and press his hand to his chest as if struck. The acolyte, another follower of the cult who had slipped in earlier, did not speak. His posture said threat. He placed a sealed token stamped with the closed mouth sigil on the table, and then stepped back into shadow without a word. The token landed with a dry, resonant clack that made the witness gasp. The chronicler's suspicion shifted toward alarm. He touched the witness's throat with a gloved finger and felt fresh abrasions along the skin, rings of faint scar tissue around the larynx, small incisions crusted with old incense residue. The witness flinched when the chronicler pressed. They marked you, the chronicler, they wrote on flesh. The witness' hands trembled against the palimpsest. They me the tongue steals the soul, the witness breathed. They names are anchors and anchors pull. They scraped names until they would not hold. He spoke in the same breath as the chronicler's demand. His voice was a high, quick whisper that filled the scriptorium with small, raw sounds. They taught us to cut sound out. The chronicler's notebook snapped shut reflexively as he wrote a single line in tight script. That was the first shift. Suspicion to alarm. The chronicler tightened his grip on the palimpsest while he listened for more signs. Who marked you? He asked. Who trained you to scrape memory from parchment and throat? The witness looked at the acolyte, then at the door, then at the chronicler. The Hierophant. He whispered. The silent Hierophant. He stamps the seal and shows us how to scrape. He gives the tests. The name landed without flourish. The chronicler felt his jaw clench. The name confirmed the threat they'd already suspected and drew the shape of a chain from doctrine to body. The acolyte did not speak. He placed the folded threat scroll on the table and angled his head. The chronicler moved his eyes to the scroll and saw the seal, an impression of a closed mouth pressed into wax, dark as dried blood. The acolyte's posture read as instruction. Leave now, we have eyes. He did not leave. Instead he watched, controlling his weight on one heel, hands curled into the sleeves of his tunic. The chronicler opened the threat scroll with careful fingers. Inside were 3 names written in a hand that tried to imitate script, but left gaps where letters failed. Each name contained lines interrupted by tiny incisions, blank spaces between strokes where the scribe had intentionally left nothing. The chronicler's breath shortened. What do the blanks mean? He asked. The witness looked down. They scraped the names from the list. The witness said, they us, that removing the name from paper weakens the living tether. They scrape a name from a page, then touch the throat, then the name goes thin in people's mouths. The chronicler flicked a speck of soot from the margin and felt the words rearrange sense into danger. The second shift began, from alarm to urgent determination. He moved his hand to the monk, style razor the witness kept hidden. Show me how, he said. Demonstrate the scraping. The chronicler meant to see the ritual's physical step. By step so archivists could catalogue it, and so the Hierophant's method could be countered. The witness hesitated, fingers twitching toward the razor. Acolyte's eyes narrowed. We do not. The acolyte's hand said more than his face. He made a slow cutting motion across his own palm, and then tucked the motion away. The chronicler felt the scriptorium tighten. The windows held the city's muffled noise at bay, and only the candle's hiss intervened. The witness lifted a thin board and placed it under a sheet of parchment. He took the bone stylus from his belt and, with the chronicler holding the candle closer, drew the stylus along the letter's edges. The stylus scraped the parchment. Particles rose in pale dust. The chronicler saw the exact angle of the stylus, the pressure that scarred fibers, the way scraping smoothed raised ink into raw skin. He had wanted details, and the demonstration provided them in cold, mechanical steps. They taught us to keep the names whole until the right night, the witness said. Then they call the list and scrape without ceremony. The scraping is a ritual and an instruction. You must do it from the left always, so the direction unthreads speech. The chronicler noted every motion and felt his urgency grow into a plan. Capture the physical evidence and remove the instrument from their reach. They argued in short lines, take me to the Hierophant, the chronicler, bring me to the place where they carve the throat. No, the witness blurted. If the Hierophant finds me again, the witness' sentence cut off in a small, precise exhalation, he will seal what I remember. The witness moved his fingers to his mouth in the same mime he had used before. Then we will take the amulet. The chronicler, if that piece can be read. We will prove the right. He reached for the sealed mouth token the acolyte had placed on the table. The acolyte sprang forward without a sound and grabbed his wrist. The chronicler met the acolyte's grip with his own. Their hands locked, knuckles white. "Let go," the chronicler ordered. "Let go, acolyte." He used the name because names shaped claims and because he wanted the man to hold responsibility. The acolyte's jaw worked. He had a small scar along his brow and wore plain patched sleeves. He did not reply with words. He loosened his grip and let the token slide across the wood. The chronicler picked up the marble amulet and turned it with his thumb. The surface was cold and carved with a sealed mouth icon. He pressed a thumb into the carved lips and felt a tiny ridge where incense had darkened the hollows. He slipped the amulet into his coat and closed his hand around it like a fist. "You cannot keep it long," the acolyte said, without speaking. He moved his chin toward the door, signaling the cult's watch. The chronicler stood, paper and candle in one hand, the witness's torn scroll in the other. He would not leave the scriptorium without as much evidence as he could carry. They moved to test a single reconstructed syllable next. The chronicler insisted. He wanted to see whether sound alone produced a physical effect. He placed a scrap of palimpsest in front of the witness and said, "Just the syllable, not a name." One sound, the witness' head shook. "They will know," he said. "They will feel it in bones." The chronicler's fingers tightened around the brass, latched notebook. The test began with small motions. The chronicler counted the cadence allowed to steady the scene. 1, he said. 2. The witness exhaled, and a slender consonant left his lips. The acolyte in the doorway dropped his hand to his chest with the abruptness of someone struck. His eyes rolled back for a blink. The candle flame wavered. The chronicler felt a pressure in his own face, like the first bite of cold water. Immediately, a sigil on the marble amulet at the table's edge flared with a dull sheen as if the carved line had taken in light. The chronicler stared. The witness blinked, and then, mid-blink, his recent memory slipped. He could no longer recall standing in the scriptorium that night, could not recollect the acolyte's profile. He reached for a line of the palimpsest, and his hand missed the letters as though a film had lifted between eye and page. Panic arrived as a practical motion. The chronicler clapped a hand over the witness' fist to steady it, and pushed a prepared scrap of paper into the witness' other hand. "Write," he said. "Write what you can remember of the syllable now." The witness' mouth formed the sound, then closed. He did not speak. He dug the bone stylus into the scrap and scratched letters with a hand that shuddered. The chronicler pressed his thumb to the witness's wrist to stop the shaking. He tapped his own pen against the table to count seconds and forced the witness' hand to keep moving. Ink smeared. The witness' eyes watered and then went blank for a second. He lost sight of the spaces between letters. "I can see the curve," he said. "It is gone." He scraped another line with the razor until almost nothing remained. The chronicler kept his pen moving, forcing record onto pages before the witness's short-term recollection could dissolve entirely. That moment served as the chapter's climax. The forbidden syllable caused a visible, immediate erasure in the witness. The chronicler realized that speech did not merely anger listeners. It triggered an active process tied to the amulet, to ritual scars, and to deliberate scraping. He stood and snatched the amulet from the table while the acolyte lunged. They scuffled in the alley behind the safe house, where the chronicler had earlier set a small trap. He had a brief plan: use the token as proof to leverage other witnesses, and to map the Hierophant's operation. The struggle lasted seconds but moved the chapter into a new register. The acolyte's hands were collused. He shoved with the force of belief. The chronicler twisted, and the amulet fell into his coat. A rock struck the acolyte's calf, and he staggered. He did not cry out. He clutched the token with both hands, breath hard and shallow. The chronicler pushed him away and ran back inside with the amulet clutched in a fist. Back at the table, the witness' hand no longer remembered the syllable S shape. He clawed at his throat and then at the palimpsest. "It ate it," he said. "It takes what we named the chronicler paste," and then sat, the candle's heat prickling his palms. He realized their window was brief. Each spoken line could provoke an erasure that would consume names and the memory of names. They worked fast. The chronicler had the witness hold the pen while he steadied the man's wrist. He made the witness write the syllable again and again, each time pressing a sign at the margin as a record. He ordered the acolyte to bring wax and to seal each scrap in a small envelope. The acolyte paused, then obeyed without speaking, his movements precise and efficient. Conversation became clipped, urgent. "Tell me how they choose names," the chronicler demanded. "Tell me who is first." "Those who speak loudly," the witness whispered. "Those who claim ownership. Those who name themselves before the Hierophant names them back." The chronicler wrote the words down and felt a new fear. The cult did not merely erase speech. They targeted social anchors, anyone who held a name tightly. They catalogued what remained. The chronicler noted the amulet's carved lines, the razor's micro grooves, the palimpsest's layered inks. He circled marginal marks and traced them with his finger. He forced the witness to recount a specific event. The night they scraped the parish register in the outer district, the witness answered in bursts. Names were called. People came, they scraped the roll. The priest sat and let his own name be thin. Each fragment the witness provided gave the chronicler a map of places and nights where erasure had followed public registers. Another external event arrived, a soft knock at the safe-house door. They froze. The acolyte held himself in a line at the doorway, eyes fixed on the latch. The chronicler moved to the door and peered through the crack. A woman stood outside, cloak pulled tight, face turned away as if to hide her features. She did not knock again. She left a folded note on the sill and stepped back into the night. The chronicler opened the note with quick fingers. It contained a single line, 3 names, 2 of which matched the list inside the threat, scroll, and a place. The registry house by the aqueduct. The note's script trembled as if written by a hand that feared watching. The chronicler's urgency narrowed into a plan. They had dates, a place, and a method to force replicas of the test. He made the witness rest, and then pushed him to the roof to look for fresher marginalia in the palimpsest. The roof gave a view of the district where the registry house sat low by the canal. The chronicler spread the palimpsest on the sheet and scanned the margins. He found a newly darkened sigil cut into the edge like fresh ink. A small circle with a line across the mouth. The line's depth suggested intention. It looked as if someone had pressed a metal tool into the fibers that morning. The chronicler felt a third shift, resolve hardened into cold strategy. He tucked the amulet under his coat, folded the palimpsest into a waterproof wrap, and made a list of actions. Verify the registry's records, find the priest mentioned, and seek witnesses unaffected by the ritual. He would not rely solely on testimony. He arranged the scraps into stacks ready for transport. The acolyte watched him and did not hide venom in his posture. Instead, he watched with the kind of stillness that belonged to someone ready to follow orders. Before he left, the chronicler turned to the scribal witness and said, "Name me one thing you will not forget, even if they take other lines." The witness blinked, fingers curling around the razor. He set the razor down deliberately and pointed to the burn on his hand. "The burn," he said. "I remember the heat when they branded my palm after the scraping. I remember the smell of the oil." The chronicler wrote the detail down and underlined it. They left in staggered movement. The chronicler down the ladder, the witness supported at his side, the acolyte trailing like a shadow. The city had not yet woken. They crossed narrow alleys where merchants hung shutters and where a cart creaked in the distance. The chronicler kept the amulet pressed flat and felt its carved mouth like a cold pulse against his ribs. On the roof of a low courtyard house, where the chronicler stopped to read the palimpsest once more, he found the new marginal sigil, freshly incised across the edge of the parchment. The lines cut glistened faintly in the dawn. He could see the direction of the tool's stroke and the small ridges it left in the fiber. He slid the scrap into his coat and felt the day shift. The pursuit had changed into a race. He folded the palimpsest tighter, checked the witness's breathing, and descended the ladder toward the registry house with the amulet heavy in his pocket. He did not speak of fate or destiny. He checked the map, counted steps, and adjusted plans. The final sound the chapter left was the chronicler closing the palimpsest inside his coat, feeling the new sigil ridge against his chest, and heading down, the city's stones damp beneath his boots. He forced the carved stone door wide. Hinges screamed and 50 hooded figures remained motionless around the slab. Suspicion tightened his jaw. The chronicler stepped forward with the scribal witness at his elbow and called out, "Do not move." The central slab was ringed with bodies that did not shift. A single hooded hand rested on a bundle of torn scrolls. He had come with a purpose he could name. Recover the glosses that the sect had tried to erase. The chronicler had read reports, traced depositions, and followed the scribal witness for 3 weeks after the curtain had fallen back in the cellar. The same night he had found the witness gagged and bound. He had spent nights cataloging the wash of ink, the scorch marks, and the odd tally marks on the witness' wrist. Now a physical threat stood between him and the evidence, the scrap of context. The chronicler moved first. He gripped the nearest acolyte's forearm and pulled. The acolyte's robe scraped stone. 2 others lunged. The scribal witness dropped to his knees and reached for the scrolls on the slab. "Stop!" The chronicler's voice carried into the chamber. "Stop. Scrolls remain where they are." The nearest acolyte answered with a single, deliberate motion. He raised a flat palm and turned his head toward the silent Hierophant. The Hierophant did not speak. He tilted his head in a slow, precise way that the chronicler had recorded in notes weeks before. That tilt was a sign, a call to order. The chronicler's suspicion shifted to a sharper fear. The tilt had always preceded enforcement. Scribal witness, stay back. The chronicler. He did not let go of the acolyte's arm. He felt the leather of his coat catch on the acolyte's cuff, heard thread tear. He kept his weight forward. The scribal witness' hands hovered over the bundle. His fingers were ink, dark, palms hollowed from clutching pens. He answered. They hid the page under the slab. The words came in a high whisper. His voice trembled and he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. The acolytes formed a slow arc. The chronicler's suspicion shifted into calculation. He counted exits, angles where light from the doorway cut the nearest face in half. He remembered the gag he had removed in the cellar, the thread through leather, the imprint left on the witness' lips. The memory pushed him to action. He lunged. The chronicler grabbed the bundle from the slab and ran for the doorway while an acolyte blocked his path. The acolyte's forearm stopped him. The chronicler struck the arm and shoved. The 2 bodies slammed into a row of chanting candles. One guttered. Wax ran across the stone. Acolyte. You have no right, chronicler. The right is proof. Give me a way out, acolyte. The Hierophant commands silence, chronicler. The Hierophant commands fear. Open your hands. The acolyte's hand tightened. The chronicler twisted. He felt rib bone under the robe. Pain flared along his side. He did not let go of the bundle. The scribal witness shoved himself forward, scraping his knees, and together they broke the ring. They hit the archway and stumbled into a narrow passage while hooded forms reached for them. A candle flame cracked near the chronicler's scarf. He smelled burned linen and the iron tang of blood. Outside the inner sanctum, the walls were carved with tiny mouth sigils, repeated in a pattern that stopped at the doorway. He pressed his heel against a loose stone and felt a small hollow where a seal had been removed. They ducked into a cluttered alcove. The scribal witness collapsed against a crate and pulled the bundle to his chest. He thumbed a torn edge open and exposed a palimpsest page. The chronicler crouched beside him and seeded his fingers through the margin. Read it. The chronicler. The witness' eyes flicked up. There is a gloss. Small, smeared. They tried to scrape it out. He worked the page free with a bone stylus, scraped at the scraped ink. Here. He held the marginal note beneath a shaft of moonlight that slanted through a slit in the ceiling. The letters were shallow and uneven, written in a cramped hand. Acolyte steps sounded in the corridor. The chronicler slid the page under his coat. They were not alone. A pair of acolytes pressed their shoulders through the passage and barred the exit with heavy bodies. One of them had the faint, clean smell of incense on his robes. The chronicler saw him glance at the palimpsests sticking from the witness bundle. "You will not leave with those," the acolyte said. The chronicler pushed his shoulders forward. "You tell me where the gloss came from," he said. "Name your founder." He kept his voice level. He felt the tension in his mouth, the gravel in his throat. The acolyte's eyes flicked to the Hierophant, who remained visible in the inner chamber, a silhouetted figure with a cloth over his mouth. The Hierophant raised his hand and ran 2 fingers across his own mouth, a signal for the circle to hold. An acolyte moved to take the palimpsest. The scribal witness lashed out. He grabbed the acolyte's wrist and bit. The acolyte spat and struck the witness across the face. The chronicler shoved himself between them, catching a glancing blow to his cheek. "The chronicler," said another voice from the dark, "you have come to steal our law." A second acolyte leaned into the light. His beard was singed along one side, and he wore a thin band of tally marks on his wrist. He looked at the palimpsest with something like hunger. The chronicler felt his suspicion shift to a cold certainty. This was not only piety. He had seen covert marks in municipal records before. He had read how local magistrates used ascetic gestures to seize land. He now watched the acolyte's hands curl as if measuring possession rather than prayer. "Scribal witness, tell me what the marginal note says," the chronicler ordered. The witness' fingers shook. He touched the letters and whispered, "It says the founder received a gift of silence from a procurator. It names 2 magistrates and a grant." He forced the words out slow. "It names control, not doctrine." 2 acolytes flinched at that. One lowered his head and ran a hand over his mouth. The other whispered to his neighbor. The chronicler heard the word procurator like a blade through the room. The revelation tore a fissure through the acolyte ring. The chronicler watched faces that had been steady split into doubt. He saw an acolyte's jaw work and counted the seconds before anger returned. The suspicion he had carried all along bloomed now into a new emotion, outrage directed at a system of control. His hands tightened on the palimpsest. The founder took a land grant, the chronicler allowed, and used silence as a tool to bind laborers and remove witnesses. He kept his voice low. "This is politics, not purity." The acolyte with the singed beard spat on the stone. "You lie. You twist the gloss, then show me the registrar's mark." The chronicler answered, "If the grant exists, name it." He stepped back with the page held up. His posture said he would run if they lunged. One acolyte bolted into the chamber and disappeared into shadow toward the inner circle. The chronicler heard the rustle of robes and the faint scrape of wooden sandals. He heard the Hierophant move, and the room tightened in on the sound of a single footfall. They returned with a small wooden tablet, the kind used for quick notations. A thin seal was impressed at the edge. The chronicler saw the same procurator stamp he had seen in a municipal ledger months earlier. The chronicler lifted the palimpsest and pressed the page against the tablet for comparison. Letters matched. The acolyte who had spoken lowered his head. The chronicler felt the room's authority wobble. A second emotional shift occurred. Suspicion, disbelief, cautious clarity. Some acolytes broke their poses. One whispered, "Is this why our mouths were bound?" Another glanced at the Hierophant as if measuring him for a new suit of doubts. The silent Hierophant stepped from the slab's shadow. He walked with measured, ascetic control, hands folded within his sleeves. He approached the chronicler slowly, and the chronicler read the Hierophant's expression for the first time. A tightness at the corner of the eye, a practice of restraint that resembled calculation. The Hierophant stopped 2 strides away and lifted a flat iron signet so the torchlight darkened its etched lip. He slid the signet back into place and extended both hands with the palms facing inward, then made a single, deliberate gesture as if placing an invisible gag on the air. His fingers closed and knocked against one another. An acolyte seized the scribal witness. Hands locked the witness's shoulders and pressed his head down to the slab. The chronicler moved to intervene and felt 4 hands pin him instead. Acolytes formed a ring and began a low incantatory hum. The sound was not words. It was a pressure built by breath and rhythm. The chronicler's chest constricted. He measured his choices. He could release the palimpsest and risk its reburial, or he could force a confrontation that might end in death. He chose action. He wrenched free a hand and struck the nearest acolyte across the temple. The man reeled. The ring tightened at once. An acolyte produced a cloth gag, the same pattern the chronicler had found in the cellar. They moved to press it across the scribal witness's mouth. The chronicler saw the witness' size widen and go to the chronicler with a single frantic look, asking permission, begging for an alternative. Do it. The Hierophant signaled with his chin. The chronicler felt the weight of a decision drop on him. He thought of the cellar night when he had found the witness bound and the torn scroll forced into his hands. He thought of the scorch marks on walls where documents had been burned. He could not allow another erasure. The scribal witness swallowed, his lips trembled. He pressed the palimpsest to his chest and said nothing. Acolyte. Prepare the silence, chronicler. No, he shoved his shoulder into the acolyte, holding him. The acolyte lost grip. The chronicler lunged to the witness, tore the gag out, and pushed the palimpsest into a shaft of moonlight where the scraped letters glinted. The Hierophant raised his hand and began a slow ritual gesture. 3 precise motions with the fingers that the chronicler had traced in earlier notes. The room's hum rose in volume. The chronicler heard the rubbed edges of the palimpsest rasp as the witness opened his mouth. He felt the air shift around the circle as people leaned in. The scribal witness' lips parted. He spoke one line. He did not read the whole gloss. He forced out the single erased sentence scrawled in a cramped hand, the fragment the sect had tried to drive out with scraping and fire. It was a short line in Latin, choked and thin. The grant binds tongues to the land, sound broke the ring. The ritual hum fractured into sharp cries. Acolytes flinched as if stung. A single torch pitched forward and smashed into the floor. The chronicler grabbed the palimpsest and held it aloft as evidence. The spoken line had undone the pattern the Hierophant relied upon. In a rush, the acolytes surged. One attempted to strike the chronicler across the head. Another reached for the witness. The ring collapsed as bodies toppled and robes snagged on carved mouths in the stone. The Hierophant advanced with a flat palm raised like a judge handing down sentence. He had always used silence as a weapon. Now he moved to reclaim it physically. The scribal witness convulsed twice and then went still. His hands clutched at his throat. His face went white. Blood leaked at the corner of his mouth, where the earlier bite had torn the skin. The chronicler felt a hot pinch of sorrow and the immediate, concrete need to secure what remained. Get the pages! The chronicler barked. He shoved a fallen torch toward the stack and ordered the acolytes, hold them. He jammed the palimpsest and other torn pages into his coat. Wax dripped on his hand. He stuffed the small tablet with the procurator's seal under his arm. A loud crack resounded as the Hierophant struck the central slab with his staff. The blow sent a shower of dust down the chamber. The Hierophant moved to the scribal witness and bent over him. He did not touch the man's mouth at first. He put a hand on the witness's chest and counted the witness' breathing. The chronicler saw the Hierophant's expression change for the first time. Not calm restraint, but a tight, almost human concern. Speak, the Hierophant demanded in a rare, rasped syllable. The sound held no ceremonial cadence. It sounded like a man who had been forced to use his voice. The witness' lips twitched but did not form speech. Blood stained his lower lip. He made a small, broken sound and then lost speech altogether. The Hierophant drew back. He put the marble amulet shaped like a sealed mouth beside the witness' hand and pressed his palm to the man's brow. Then he lifted the amulet and placed it over the witness' mouth, as if sealing it with a token. The chronicler lunged forward and slashed at the Hierophant's wrist. The iron signet clattered to the floor. The Hierophant did not strike back. He stepped away into the darker shadow of the chamber and lifted the hood to show more of his face. Scars lined his jaw. His mouth had faint ritual lines along the cheeks. The chronicler saw then that his voice had likely once been used with intent, and then denied. A secondary twist revealed itself in the Hierophant's face. The man who had enforced silence carried evidence of prior speech bound into his flesh. The chronicler's understanding shifted again. The Hierophant had once been a vessel for both rhetoric and restraint. His authority rested on the memory of words he no longer permitted. The acolytes splintered. Several fled into the tunnels. Others stood dumbfounded. The chronicler took advantage of the confusion. He dragged the scribal witness to the chamber's edge, ripped open his coat, and collected whatever pages were salvageable. He tied them into a bundle with twine from his satchel. The chronicler, said an acolyte who had not fled, "You will not carry those out." He reached for the bundle. The chronicler aimed a throw toward the passage. The bundle landed against a wall. The acolyte caught it and opened it reflexively. The chronicler tackled him and forced the papers back. They wrestled on the flagstone. Wax and dust spattered both men. The chronicler's left hand found the edge of a palimpsest, and he pressed it close to his chest. Outside, the first light of dawn grazed the top of the stairwell. Dust motes floated and collected on the pages like small, dirty stars. The chronicler felt urgency, a concrete pressure to leave before the Hierophant could rally his followers. He lifted the scribal witness over his shoulder and began to climb with the other man stumbling along. The temple's exit was narrower than the stair had been. A carved lip on the wall snagged his coat and tore it down the seam. The chronicler cursed and kept climbing. At the top, 2 acolytes attempted to block them. The chronicler shoved past. An acolyte grabbed the witness' ankle. The scribal witness kicked him squarely in the shin. The acolyte yelped and released his grip. The chronicler did not look back until they reached the courtyard beyond the hidden entrance. They fell into a small yard where morning light pooled on broken tiles. The chronicler laid the witness on a low stone bench and spread the pages across his knees. He checked the marginal note again. The handwriting matched municipal records and the procurator's stamp. It named land transfers and the mechanism by which tenants had their legal rights removed. "Where did you find the rest?" The chronicler. The scribal witness tried to answer, but his throat had closed. He tapped his fingers against his jaw where the earlier scar had been, then motioned with his hand to the palimpsest. He made a small, urgent scratching motion with his fingers, as if urging the chronicler to read faster. The chronicler read aloud, line by line, the marginal note and the appended registry markings. He named each magistrate and the terms of the grant. As he spoke, a pattern emerged. The cult's enforcement of silence had allowed the founder to remove local records, to intimidate witnesses, and to seize property without public notice. The doctrine of silence had been a legal instrument. He recorded every name into his brass, latched notebook with a narrow reading monocle balanced at his eye. He wrote in short lines so his hand would not cramp. He observed the scribal witness with careful attention. The man breathed shallowly, lips pressed as if holding a final word. A neighbor in the courtyard, a tile mason the chronicler had met months before while tracing stolen lands, stepped out of a side doorway. He wore a simple tunic and carried a chipped chisel. He had heard the commotion and touched the palimpsest briefly. "I know that seal," he said. "That is the mark of Magistrate Aurelius. He took land near the aqueduct last harvest." The tenants disappeared from the rolls. He spat and smashed his chisel into a loose tile. "Then this proves it," the chronicler replied. He felt the second half of the case settle into place. Official collaboration had propped up the sect's abuses. The chronic pattern of erasure had been deliberate. The tile mason's name was Marcus. He offered to help carry the pages to a safe chest in a nearby archive owned to the chronicler's acquaintance. The chronicler accepted. He wrapped the palimpsests in linen, pressed the small tablet with the procurator's seal into the bundle, and left the marble amulet with the witness as the man slept in ragged, exhausted peace. They walked through the narrow alleys toward the archive. The chronicler kept watch. He heard the distant noise of sandals on early market stones and could not tell if those sounds were normal traffic or acolytes regrouping. He folded the pages against his chest and felt the edges prick his skin with grit. At the archive, the chronicler lifted the brass, latched notebook he carried and opened it. He copied the marginal note, the procurator's stamp, and the names into precise lines. He recorded the time and the way the witness had forced the line into speech. He catalogued every burned edge and every scrape on the palimpsest. "You will record the date," Marcus, we need to file this carefully. If Aurelius moves to claim nobleship, we need to stop him now." The chronicler nodded. He felt the emotional arc resolve into a steady determination. He wrote the final line into the notebook and laid the recovered parchment inside the brass, latched case. He placed the marble amulet on top of the bundle. The act was concrete. He did not make promises to himself in flowery phrases. He laid objects, stamped names, and closed the latch. As he snapped the brass closed, he felt a dull ache in his ribs where he had been struck. He pressed his palm to the wound, tasted iron. The scribal witness stirred on the bench and, with effort, drew 2 shallow breaths. He raised a hand and touched the marble amulet where it lay. "They will come for this," Marcus softly. He leaned close and lowered his voice. "Aurelius will not cede land quietly. The Hierophant will not accept exposure." The chronicler looked at Marcus and then at the witness. He pulled the coat tight around the bundle and set the sealed notebook in the archive chest. He closed the lid. He did not end with a long declaration. He put the chest on a shelf between 2 legal codices and slid a small, plain slate over the latch. He felt the finality of the action. Evidence secured, names recorded, the witness sheltered. He had resolved the chapter's immediate conflict, the forced erasure, by securing proof that the cult's doctrine had served a public, political purpose. He sat for one long moment and counted his breaths. In, out. The scribal witness coughed and then fell silent. The chronicler put his hand on the man's shoulder and felt solid bone reveal itself under thin skin. He snapped the brass latch shut on the recovered fragments, laid the marble amulet on top, and pushed the archive door closed with the fragments sealed inside. He walked away from the chest, leaving with a map of patrons to visit and names to serve summonses upon. He did not speak a vow. He formed a list. He would present the procurator's seal to a magistrate he trusted. He would urge Marcus to gather tenant testimony. And he would print the palimpsest's glosses on separate folios to distribute among those who might act. Outside, morning light cut across the market in a narrow band. The chronicler pulled his coat collar up and made his first concrete outward action. He walked to the magistrate's office and requested an audience. He produced the small wooden tablet with the procurator's seal and the copy of the marginal note. The magistrate looked at the seal and at the handwriting and blinked. He made a record. He issued an order to check the land registry for the dates named in the grant. The chronicler watched the magistrate's hands scratch the order and felt the thin, exact movement of bureaucratic action enact a remedy. Back at the archive, the scribal witness lay quiet and thin but breathing. The marble amulet rested on the sealed bundle like a token of what had been taken and what had been restored. The chronicler returned, unlocked the chest, and felt the pages press cool and grainy against his palm. He did not speak to anyone. He catalogued each folio, wrote each name in the brass, latched notebook with exact letters, and made copies. He sent Marcus out to collect 2 tenant witnesses. He left the archive door latched and walked as if his steps were part of a ledger, actions to match facts. At dusk he visited the scribal witness. The man's eyes opened and focused on the chronicler. He touched the scar along his jaw and tried to say something. A small, hoarse whisper escaped. "They will not erase it." He forced a smile and then slept. His voice had been used once more to confirm a truth and paid for that single speech with ruinous loss. The chronicler recorded that sentence and then turned the page. He bound the palimpsest fragments into his brass, latched notebook and numbered each insertion. He did not write about feelings. He wrote names, dates, and the exact clause of the grant. He underlined the procurator's seal and attached the tile mason Marcus' testimony. The day closed with an inventory of actions. Magistrate summoned, tenant testimony requested, palimpsest secured, witness sheltered. He had resolved the immediate erasure and exposed the political mechanism that had used silence as a tool of domination. The Hierophant had retreated into shadow. The cult's doctrine was fractured. Night fell. The chronicler locked the archive and walked home. He carried no rhetorical flourish. He carried the brass, latched notebook, the marble amulet wrapped in cloth, and a list of names. He paused once on the street, felt his ribs ache where he had been struck, and then kept walking. The final concrete image of the chapter is simple. He snapped the brass latch shut on the recovered fragments, laid the marble amulet on top, and pushed the archive door closed with the fragments sealed inside. Emotion root. Suspicion, emotion shifts, suspicion fear clarity, and suspicion outrage resolution. These states drove the chronicler's choices from the first forced door to the final closed chest. The chapter ends with evidence secured, the scribal witness mute but protected, and a bureaucratic path open to undo the abuses once masked as doctrine.